Hi there, my name is Dr. Joelle Hood, and welcome to a very quick version of More Good Days, Brain to Line Strategies for Staff and Student Success. Thank you so much for being here. We know you're juggling a lot, and the very fact that you're here shows that you're choosing growth. John Maxwell says change is inevitable, but growth is optional. And we hope that you will find your learning here today and anytime you learn with us to be both personal and professional development. After all, we bring our whole human selves to work with us each day. A little bit about Thriving University. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. You can go to our website and check it out. But just know that we are all three partners in this business are educators, former teachers. Jesse's still a teacher. Janine and I were both principals in alternative ed. And we have a great love for reaching and teaching kids, as well as the adults who serve them. When we looked at this pandemic, when it happened in March, we thought, how are we going to support our clients and new clients around this work? And so we do a lot of trainings on social, emotional, and academic learning, on mindfulness, on mindset, trauma responsive, restorative practices, all these kinds of things. So rather than keep them separate, we decided to take all of those lenses to create this framework. And we believe that the strategies for a successful year are belonging in relationships, adult brain state, intentional environment, brain-based learning, and explicit instruction and modeling of social, emotional, and academic learning. There's no way in 30 minutes that I can go through this whole framework, but I do want to give you some information about the two. I want to give you a toolkit that goes with the framework, as well as a Google Drive folder that supports all of the learning in that framework. So even though you're going to just get a taste of it right now, if you email me at joelle@thrivinguniversity.com, I will share the Google Drive folder with you. I will send you the toolkit for a successful year. And also I will invite you to join our Thrive Tribe groups that we have on Facebook. Just really great ways to stay connected and continue learning. If I show you this picture right now, which letter or letters represent how you're feeling right now? Are you feeling A, pretty joyful? Are you feeling D, pretty excited? Are you feeling B, overwhelmed? Or C, just want the blanket over your head? If I were to ask you, you might be more than one of those things, right? You might have what we call paradoxical feelings. And I know that I have felt this way a lot during this year. So there are many times when I have felt overwhelmed and grateful. In fact, today, there are times when I have felt anxious and yet optimistic as well. And part of that is because we are experiencing a collective trauma. We have the pandemic, we have distance learning, we have a spotlight on racial and social injustice. We have fires burning up and down the coast, right? Not just the coast, burning all over California. And because of that, we are experiencing really a collective trauma. Even though we're in the same storm, however, we aren't all in the same boat. Some people are barely hanging on in a little lifeboat, right? And others have a more sturdy boat. And it's really important at this time to keep that in mind and to tap into empathy, knowing that you might be feeling really resilient and the person next to you may be barely hanging on. So tap into empathy and give grace both to yourself and to others during this difficult time. Before we dive into the learning, I want to give you a quick mini lesson on the brain. So we're going to just talk about three parts of the brain. Our prefrontal cortex, this area right here behind our forehead. I'm going to use football as a metaphor. And so our prefrontal cortex is like the quarterback. It's in charge, it calls the plays, it's paying attention and knows what's going on, right? Then we have our hippocampus, which is like our coach. It has our memories, it calls the plays, it brings out the playbook, says, remember when we did this and it worked really well? Or remember when we did this and it did not work well? Maybe we can tweak it, or maybe we just throw that idea out. Then we have our amygdala. And our amygdala is a little almond-shaped structure in our brain, and it is like a blocker, right? And so that blocker alerts us to danger. Our brain's number one goal, you might think, is learning, but that is not true. Our brain's number one goal is keeping us alive. It is about survival. And so when there's a hint of danger, right, our amygdala sets us off into fight, flight, or freeze, which is great for staying alive. But just like in football, uh, a blocker could move too quickly and get an offsides penalty, or a little too aggressively and get an unnecessary roughness penalty. In the same way, our amygdala sometimes responds when it doesn't need to. It can just move too quickly or too roughly, or it responds to perceived threat, not actual threat. So knowing these little parts of the brain, here's some other things I want you to know about the brain. There are three things that your brain really hates: chronic unpredictability, isolation, and physical and emotional restraint. Now, think about that for just a minute. Think about our current situation: chronic unpredictability. If things are happening so fast, we don't know what's happening. Isolation, right? We are having to social distance. Physical and emotional restraint. We have a lot of rules right now of things that we can't do, right? And even though it's for the greater good, for the pandemic, our brain doesn't get that part. Our brain just knows that there's restraints on us, and it doesn't like that. And so, because the brain hates these three things, we have to be really intentional, both with students and colleagues or leaders with your staff, about, because our brain hates chronic unpredictability, we need, wherever and whenever possible, to build in predictability. And remembering that not everybody's in the same boat, we need to add predictability with flexibility to that. Because our brains hate isolation, we need to prioritize social connection more than ever. And because our brains hate physical and emotional restraint and being told no, right? Then wherever and whenever possible, we need to empower both student and staff voice and choice. So let's get right into the first aspect of that: predictability with flexibility. We create the calm in the classroom. So when little people are overwhelmed by big emotions, it's our job to share our calm, not join their chaos, not get caught up in the tornado. Because a dysregulated adult will never regulate a dysregulated child. And our emotions are contagious. When we can present that calm, kids can catch that. And you've seen it when you walked into a staff meeting and maybe you were feeling really down, and then when you walked into the staff meeting, you ended up feeling really great because there's a lot of people connecting, and it felt warm. Or maybe the opposite. Maybe you walked in a staff meeting in a really good mood, and you're like, and then you're like, wah, 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 as you felt like energy being sucked out of you. That is because our emotions are contagious, and so is our stress. They did a study a couple years ago where they measured the stress level of teachers, and then they took saliva samples from the kids. And what they found was the more stressed the teacher, the higher levels of cortisol in the kid's saliva. Cortisol being a stress hormone. So we don't know what came first, chicken or the egg, right? Stressed out teachers, stressed out kids, but we do know that emotional contagion usually happens from the most powerful person in the room. So as the adults, hopefully that's us, whether we're teachers or leaders or counselors. And so knowing that our emotions are contagious, a lot of times we go in trying to fix kids, but it starts with us. I love this quote: yesterday I was clever, so I wanted to change the world, or my students, or my colleagues, or my family. Today I'm wise, so I'm changing myself. It is important for us to be a thermostat, not a thermometer. So as we enter a room, it's not our job just to take the temperature. How are these kids doing today? Or how are my colleagues today? It is our job to adjust the temperature with our presence. So, you know, if the kids are feeling, super stressed out, we might do a focused attention practice to help bring them back to calm, to share our calm. If kids are feeling, lethargic, or their eyes are getting glazed over, maybe we need to do a brain break activity, right, to get them engaged. But it's our job to keep that thermostat at a nice level, right? Not just take the temperature. I love this quote. I used to put it in everybody's box when I was a teacher, and I've done it as an administrator and now as a consultant. I'm going to read it to you. Here we go. I've come to a frightening conclusion that I am the decisive element in the room I'm in. A Zoom room, a classroom, a staff room, a living room. It's my personal approach that creates the climate. It's my daily mood that makes the weather. At any time, I possess a tremendous power to make another person's life miserable or joyous. I can be a tool of torture or an instrument of inspiration. I can humiliate or heal. In all situations, it is my response that decides whether a crisis will be escalated or de escalated, and another person humanized or dehumanized. We create the climate. When we talk about our brains wanting predictability and flexibility, that's what our kids need from us. We need to be predictable and flexible. And because we know our emotions are contagious and that they are rippling out to our students and our colleagues and our families, wouldn't we want to be super intentional about bringing the best versions of ourselves to the table? So, big idea here, our emotions are contagious. We create the climate, and it starts with us. So, making sure that our presence is where it needs to be. And then teaching kids how they can make their emotions more predictable. Teaching kids focused attention practices, breathing exercises, smell the pizza, cool off the pizza. You could do a Spider-Man breath where you inhale like this and then you shoot it out, right? You could trace little boxes. There's all kinds of different breathing or mindfulness of sound or mindful eating, focused attention practices that help kind of lower the heart rate and get us in that calm state. I mentioned sometimes we need to wake kids up, and we can do that with a brain break. We can do that by, one of our favorites is just doing the simple thing, peace and love. So peace, love, and now switch them. So peace, love, peace, love. I'm still not good at this yet. I'm a work in progress. I'm getting better. But when we do that, it engages our brain in a new way, right? And it wakes us up, activates our brain, and we can get back to learning. So big idea, predictability and flexibility, it starts with us as the adults. We need to show up as our best selves. We create the climate. We want to be a thermostat, not a thermometer. And we want to make sure that we are practicing and teaching our kids how to do brain breaks and focused attention practices. The next element of the brain is prioritizing social connection. So do you know that loneliness, and I'm not talking about being alone, I love being alone, I'm an introvert, but loneliness, like being in a room full of people and not feeling connected, you can feel alone. You can feel alone being by yourself if there's no one that you could reach out to. That is as harmful to your body as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Now you might be saying, seriously, Joelle, are you telling the truth? Are you making that up? No, I have the link. I can send you the study. But I think if you think about it for a minute, it will make sense to you. When you think of elderly people, when they start to lose that social connection, it definitely affects their physical health. And the same is true for us at any age. And so is the opposite. When we get support, so anytime we get an encouraging word or a shared laugh or a hug or satisfying conversation, a gesture of kindness, a few minutes of fun, our stress levels actually go down. There's a drop in cortisol. Our immune system is bolstered. Our wounds heal faster. We catch fewer colds. We even fight diseases like cancer more effectively. And our heart literally gets stronger. In fact, the whole cardiovascular system works more efficiently with lower blood pressure and a decreased heart rate. So belonging is critical. Our brains are formed from back to front. And back here we have our lizard brain, or our brainstem area. And the number one priority for that area is, am I safe? Remember, I told you our brain is all about survival. So that's the oldest part of our brain. Am I safe? In our limbic system, our concern is, am I loved? Am I valued? Do I feel like I belong? And once we have those two needs met, only then can we get to the executive functioning in our prefrontal cortex, where we can engage in learning and problem solving. The only way to soothe the survival state is through the creation of safety. The only way to soothe an upset emotional state is through connection. And so if we want kids to learn, then we need to make sure that their emotional states are met and their survival states are met. And the same with adults. When adults feel like they don't belong at work, they're less engaged, they enjoy it less. Sometimes they're uncooperative and disruptive. It can cause anxiety and depression. But when we do feel like we belong at work, We're actually more creative and innovative. We can solve problems better. We're more insightful. We collaborate better. We get a boost in our well being, and our performance is also boosted. And the same is true for kids. When kids are at school trying to figure out if they're valued or appreciated, do they belong, while they're searching for those cues and clues, that's depleting their cognitive resources and their executive function, right? They're in survival mode. And so while they're doing that, it's very difficult to be engaged in learning. But when they feel like they belong, they're much more motivated and engaged and resilient, and it boosts their mental health and well being. This is a really important point I want you to remember. It is not enough for you to have a great relationship with your kids. That's super important. However, it is also important, very, very critical and important, that you understand that you are also a broker of relationships, that you have to help your students build relationships with each other. Because when they come into your classroom to learn, whether it's in a Zoom room or a Google Meets or brick and mortar classroom, they may have a good relationship with you, but if they don't with their peers, their amygdala is going to be triggered. They're going to be in survival mode, and they're not going to be able to engage in optimum learning. As a leader, same with your staff. If you want your students to have success, then make sure that your staff are feeling connected to each other. So, how do we build the sense of belonging? Well, you can do greetings. We used to love to do greetings at the door. Now, if we're in distance learning, maybe we do it through Zoom or Google Meets. Maybe it's a wave, maybe it's a dab, all different kinds of things you can do. Check-in forms are critical. This is how you can really see not only how kids are doing individually, because you get that Google form, but in Google Forms, you also get a summary report. And so you can see, wow, a majority of my kids are feeling overwhelmed, or a majority of my kids are feeling sad, or maybe a majority of my kids are feeling happy and contented. So that's important information for you to know. We have a whole bunch of these in the Google Drive folder that we're going to share with you. So again, email us. We also have a slide deck of these types of check-ins where you can either attach them to a Google Classroom, or you can project them on the wall. So they're good distance learning or in person. And Jessie, one of our partners, she also still teaches in the classroom, and she's saying that even when they go back to in-person teaching, she will continue to do these Google form check-ins, because she has gotten probably the most personal and powerful information from those check-in forms. Another way to build belonging with you and the students is to have them engage in journals. And I was an English teacher for 13 years. So I have the black and white composition book journals, right? But you can also do digital journals where they would do it in a Google slide, or we have dialogue journal prompts that you could have them write on paper. They could type it in a doc, anything like that. So we again have bunches of samples with you for you in the Google Drive, but I want you to think about, how can I continue to build that sense of belonging? One way that you can help kids get to know each other better is giving them assignments like this. So again, we have samples of them in the Google Drive folder. A locker assignment where they decorate their locker with different clip art, right? And then they do a write-up and share about it. Or you could give them a choice whether they do a PowerPoint, they just talk about it. For younger kids, you might want to do like a Hydro Flask with stickers. There's a mask activity where they actually kind of write who they are under that mask. There's also a cool one with little Polaroid pictures, and we have all these templates. But the key is when kids can share, right, then other kids get to know them better. Circles by far in the classroom is one of my very favorite things, and the staff room. I like doing it with adults too. And you can still do that. It'll look a little bit different, but in distance learning, you can do circles. They might be a square. With Zoom, you can also do them with Flipgrid with Google Meets. And I have to say that Flipgrid has been one of my favorite tools during this whole pandemic. Doing trainings like this, I don't always get to see people or interact with them as much as I would like, although we do use breakout rooms and the chat box as much as possible. But in between sessions, when we have groups with multiple sessions, we've been doing a Flipgrid. So just ask a simple question. a belonging question, which we have a bunch for you, and then people answer. So these are actually some educators from Hawaii Department of Ed who we did a training with. And as I look at them, like, I know Faith bakes bread, and I, know that Greg loves Bon Jovi. I still remember that because I watched their Flipgrid videos. Flipgrid can be used for community building circles like that, for academic discussions. You could ask math problems or questions about a character in a story. You could use Flipgrid to get input and feedback. It's a beautiful piece of technology. I love it. Another way to build belonging with you and a student is to look at the 2x10 strategy, where you're talking to once you pick a student, you make sure intentionally that you are talking to them for 2 minutes a day for 10 days in a row. And that conversation cannot be about school or behavior. It is really just about their interests. Very powerful. One of our clients that we work with in Taft Union High School District actually took the idea of relationship mapping and made a list of all of their students, made this Google spreadsheet available to all staff. And as staff would talk to kids, they would go into the spreadsheet and add information about their sparks. Sparks are those things that like passion or purpose that kids love to do. And so, one, it got them really intentional about looking for those sparks. And two, you can look at this sheet and say, oh gosh, I got to talk to Johnny. He's not been, engaged lately. Oh, Johnny loves socializing, off-roading, and drawing. Maybe I can tie that into his assignment, or maybe I could just ask him about that and see how it goes. So, really powerful way to build belonging. Big idea here. If you want kids to learn, we have to go to connection before content, right? All right, our last little thing. Our brain, remember, does not like all of these restraints. So wherever and whenever possible, we need to empower student voice and choice, especially for kids who are living among chaos and unpredictability, things that they have very little power over. They crave control. And as educators, we like control, and that's often where we butt heads. So begin to think of, where can I give kids any choice? Where is it not an issue for me where I can give them voice and choice as much as possible? So for example, you can give them a choice of content. If you're, an English teacher, you might say, you can read this book, or you can do this type of assignment, or you can do this type of assignment. You can have them choose social conditions in places, whether they work by themselves, they work with a partner, they work in a group. You can have them have voice and choice over how they learn, what the learning process is, whether they're going to research it online, they're going to interview someone, they're going to watch a documentary, they're going to read a book, and how they demonstrate their learning, whether that's going to be in a PowerPoint or in a discussion or a speech or an essay, etc. Wherever and whenever you can give them choice is critical. And we also want you to know that there's things like Pear Deck and Nearpod and Padlet and Zoom, where you can do polls. Pear Deck we use Pear Deck a lot in our trainings, where we could play this or that, right? And so participants can move their characters over, and everybody can see what choices they're making. It's a great way to get voice, to get input. You can do polls in Zoom, Nearpod. You can do all kinds of things too. So I know I spoke really fast because this is a short little clip, but what our brain really hates, just to unpack that again: chronic unpredictability, isolation, and physical and emotional restraint. Basically, all of the things that both students and adults are facing right now. Because of that, we need to be very intentional about building predictability with flexibility. And really, a lot of that predictability comes with our presence. So we need to bring our best selves to work every day. We need to be the thermostat, not the thermometer. We need to remember that we create the climate in the room we're in. Because our brain hates isolation, we need to prioritize social connection as much as possible. With kids, that means not only you building a relationship with them through check-ins, through journaling, but also helping them build relationship with each other. Things like morning meeting, breakout rooms, Flipgrid. Also, for leaders who are watching this, make sure that you're giving your staff time to connect in meetings, especially if you're doing them via Zoom. Please plan intentionally to create space in there for them to have breakout rooms and talk to each other. We're doing so many trainings in the last several months, and what they in the feedback, one of the things that they really appreciate is that we give them time to talk to each other. They'll say things like, I miss my colleagues so much, I miss connecting, I miss talking about whatever it is. It's so nice to see the shared humanity, that people have the same concerns. So as much for students as for staff, we need to prioritize that social connection. And then last but not least, we need to empower student and staff voice and choice. Seek their input. Again, you can use Google Forms here to get information from your staff, from your colleagues, and from students. Let them have choice and voice over how they do their assignments, or just wherever possible to try and build that in. If you are intentional about addressing what the brain needs, if you build these things, like Ray said in Field of Dreams, if you build it, they will come. And if you start to think, oh my gosh, how am I ever going to make a difference? I'm doing the best I can, but the world is just such a hot mess right now. Like, I don't know what kind of difference I can make. Remember this quote from Peter Block, who wrote the book Community. He said, how do you change the world? One room at a time. Which room? The one you're in. Maybe it's a Zoom room. Maybe it's a classroom. Maybe it's a staff room. Maybe it's your living room. You are making a difference. So thank you so much for all that you do to reach and teach kids, to engage and support the educators who serve the kids. And please, let's keep in touch. Please email me at joelle@thrivinguniversity.com. If you would like to receive the Google Drive folder and toolkit for strategies for a successful year, we continue to add to it, and many of the things that I mentioned, the templates are in that Google Drive folder. So just email us and we'll connect you. We'd also love for you to follow us on our social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, check out our website, and definitely join our Thrive Tribes. So in that note, thanks again for attending. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and week, and just stay healthy, stay safe, and stay hopeful. Thanks.